unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello everyone and welcome to In Depth, a production of Souls and Liberty. 85 days to go, can you believe it? And regime change is our topic today. For more on this topic, our fellow Souls and Liberty contributors, Stephen Wynn and Arthur Clareau. Hello, man. How are you doing?
How's it going?
Hi.
Doing good, doing good. All right. I'm your host, Gary Michael Vorse, down here in Houston. When we talk about regime change, it's much more than just a Trump victory, because that's just a 4-year deal, and then it's up for grabs again 4 years later, etc. Stephen, when we talk about regime change, which is the talk in sort of Catholic intellectual circles, contemporary Catholic intellectual circles, what are they actually talking about?
Really, it means a replacement of people and institutions that dominate America's cultural, economic, and political life today, and replacing them with new leaders who are willing to jettison liberal norms for higher ideals. Basically, in short, it's really a pretty radical idea. It calls for the overthrow of the entire liberal establishment. JD Vance himself has described it in terms of de-Baathification, a reference to the policy that was instituted in Iraq in 2003 after Saddam Hussein was overthrown. Basically, his Ba'ath Party, it dominated every aspect of political life there. The entire civil service was ultimately dismissed by the government there, the American imposed government, because the civil service was seen as too corrupt, really too wedded to the ideals of the Ba'ath Party to continue in its present form. And so it's really kind of a similar call for what should be done here. The thinking is the establishment is beyond repair, really. It's so corrupt, so wedded to the ideals of liberalism, leftism, etc., that it just a complete purge really needs to happen. So, as you say, the fulfillment of that vision will take far more than just Donald Trump sitting in the Oval Office for 4 years or even 8 years. It really is a complete sort of reinvention of American society and institutions.
Yeah, that's a good framework to build for us there for further discussion here today. Arthur, JD Vance, he's kind of become something of the standard bearer for this. He's a whole new kind of Catholic political animal. What do you think?
Yeah, this is a great point to dig into, because I know personally there's many on the right who have a sort of concern over Vance, right? He's new to Catholicism. He's new to really republicanism or conservatism, or at least it seems that way from the information you get online. And there's a concern there. He's connected to people who have really close ties to Israel, and there's a lot of Americans who just don't want any foreign intervention. Like, please just don't send us to another war in the Middle East, please. Yeah. And so there's concern there, and granted, it's a valid concern. But the more you dig into what Vance has said and is saying, and the way that it seems he's leaning, the more you realize that actually probably isn't the concern you need to worry about. The man is, I was just saying this earlier off camera, between Trump and his anti-interventionism and Vance and his pro-family stance, you actually get almost a better version of the Pat Buchanan policies from a few decades ago, yeah. which is just a wonderful thing. I mean, this is someone who is looking at Viktor Orban in Hungary, seeing what he's done for families there and how that's worked, and thinking, you know what, we have problems with families here. We have problems with not high enough birth rate and all these sorts of issues. How can we fix that here? And I think that alone, even if everything else was equivalent between the Harris team and the Trump team, and this was the one policy that was different, it would be worth voting for the Trump team.
Oh, sure.
And of course, that's not even a fair comparison.
It's the Grand Canyon, actually. The difference is beyond stark. I mean, granted, give it to Kamala when she says, we have two visions. We have two visions, and they're very different. Well, yes, she's absolutely correct on that point. Stephen, let's flip back to you. So, the previous Catholic political thought, I'm talking about in these intellectual circles who write in these journals and kind of intellectual, trade sheets and things that most Catholics don't read, but they still have a great influence because they trickle down. So that sort of previous Catholic thought was dominant, or those circles was dominated by the idea, the notion that Catholicism and classical liberalism sort of fit together. So George Bush era Catholic intellectuals, I got to say they were kind of wimpy, thinking, things will just drift in the direction of the right. Those Bush era guys seem to have attempted a kind of a baptism or baptizing of the Age of Enlightenment. What do you think was behind all that? Were they just kind of wimps, or eggheads who just didn't understand you got to get down and fight? You got to go down into the trenches and pound it out with your enemies.
Right. Perhaps they were just, I don't know, infected with the spirit of accommodation. They really sought to reconcile Catholicism with, as you said, the classical liberalism that has really kind of predominated in American life for decades, centuries, even. It's interesting, the new breed of intellectuals. They're being referred to as the post-liberal right, and they really want to, in place of the radical individualism, the unfettered personal autonomy that really characterizes American society today. They view that as destructive ultimately, and they want to pursue a society that really is unified around and geared toward the common good, essentially. And so, this idea applies to practically every facet of American life. Art mentioned a few just before me. So it's interesting. I think another aspect is to think about is the fact that the idea has failed. We've had massive.
There's the point.
Yes, right. We've had massive defeats over the past couple of decades, accelerating in the last several years, that show that this sort of hands-off, strictly intellectual approach just does not cut it. It's not having the desired effect. America continues down the drain, basically, and so another approach is required.
Yeah, I did say, following up on that, they had this kind of soft approach, and it's not the intellectual approach is bad necessarily, but you better be spot on in your view of things and sort of do a gut check on your motives. Is it because you don't want to get down into the fight and commit to the all-in you got to do? So they had kind of a soft approach, whereas this new, as you style it, or that's called the post-liberal, it has a whole new vision and understanding that the status quo has to be destroyed because it's not tumbling down on its own. Arthur?
Yeah, for a conservative-minded person, this is a really tough one to get your head around, because conservatives by nature recognize that to build something this grand, to build something this spectacular, takes a lot. It's so difficult to get here. So the thought of tearing it all down is just like it goes the wrong way in our minds sometimes. And I think that in that regard, it's not a matter of tearing it all down. It's a matter of looking back and seeing where we've gone wrong and correcting that and continuing to build. And I think that's an important way to look at it. This whole liberal establishment, the reason it's gone wrong is it is actually not liberal. It is. I mean, they call it neoliberal, but it's really just a sort of weird mix of the wrong kind of authoritarianism and then the wrong kind of liberalism. Let all the nonsense loose while you clamp down on anyone who tries to kind of cage that and direct that energy into a positive direction. So it really does need to be changed. It needs to be just gutted and put back on track.
When you're redesigning a house, what's the very first thing that happens before you start building and buying furniture and planting the flowers out in front? You go through demolition. You got to
Yeah.
rip things down to the studs. I don't think that Vance or any of the sort of newer Catholic intellectual circles are proposing that you simply blow up the house. As you say, it's like go back and find out, this went wrong here, this went wrong there. But I think the difference between the sort of new Catholic intellectuals and the Bush's era intellectual Catholic circles is that there just was this unwillingness. I mean, they're like, we're conservative, so we conserve things. But, you can't take that approach if you have cancer. You can't just, we're just going to conserve the status quo of the cancer, because cancer grows. So it's interesting watching a clash of these ideas inside Catholic intellectual circles. There's an overlap with conservative circles, for example, with these Catholic intellectuals, with the economy and foreign policy and all of that. But, Stephen, the motivation for those things, where they intersect, is much more theological grounded than it was before. It's not just make America great again and then everybody go home. It's fix America. And some of those easily identified areas are foreign policy, the economy, the border, all of those things. But there's a theological grounding for all of those positions, which I don't think was necessarily there 20, 30 years ago in those Catholic intellectual circles. Your thoughts?
Right. Yeah. The pursuit of the common good that the post-liberal right is espousing is really inspired by the higher good, the theological idea of the higher good, and too often we're seeing now today that policies, political programs, they're not improving the lives of everyday Americans. They're detrimental to the common good, basically, and so I think a movement with an eye toward the divine, the higher good, is really essential. Again, there's been so much focus on personal autonomy in the United States, especially the past several decades, that that's just run amok. And when that happens, it has a really a sort of a corrosive effect on the overall condition, the common good, basically, of American society. And so I think it's a very good idea to institute policies that are you have one eye at least fixed on God. Essentially, I think that can only benefit American society.
Sure. Arthur, we'll give you the final thought here. What Stephen just said, can't imagine that going down very well over on the left.
No, not at all. But you have to remember, to exactly what Stephen said, the homeless person has freedom without discipline. The prisoner has discipline without freedom. Anyone who's successful, whether it's an athlete, a business person, whatever it is, has found that nice marriage of both.
Yes.
And that's what we need to lean into here. We need to be able to bring both of those back together and pursue both. You can't have freedom without some sort of structure in place as well.
Right. Yeah, and they're rooting their structure, the new Catholic right, let's call it that, which, let's be honest here, again, I think the left and the media and all that, those people, they sort of sense all of this, for example, in, the 2025, Project 2025, and that is really kind of a policy workup of all of this that we're talking about. You don't know if Trump is saying, I don't have anything to do with that for political reasons, but he really believes it, or maybe he just doesn't understand the full context of all of this because he doesn't have the necessary amount or whatever the right types of people around him. It's kind of his mistake in his first term, but we'll see how all of this plays out. All right, men, we're going to leave it there for today. Lots to chew over, and this isn't going away. So thanks for coming on, guys. Before we sign off today, a thought. It all begins in the church, specifically the Catholic Church. By it, we mean the needed stability of a society. What Catholic political intellectuals of 20 or 30 years ago seemed to have been unwilling to consider was man's true nature, created for the good, but still fallen and attracted to evil. That tension, because each is true, requires a delicate balancing in the day-to-day, especially the day-to-day of politics. Because each is true, we are created for God, ultimately God. We are able to recognize and see the good and have it impact us. A puppy, who doesn't smile when they see a puppy? A child's laugh, a beautiful sunrise. Those things appeal to us interiorly because we're created for them to appeal to us. We're also even able to do the good. You can help a homeless person, for example, among many zillions of other things. At the same time, the mystery of evil, or breaking from the ultimate end we're created for, inspires deep within us horrible passions and desires. The role of politics in a Christian framework is to understand that reality, the duality of it, and create laws that constrain those impulses from emerging into the real world of people's daily lives. So we have laws against murder and theft and violence, for example, laws the Democrats don't really seem to really care about. So when a society gradually shifts from this understanding, the truth of human nature in its fullness, created for the good but attracted to the evil, placing more emphasis on the freedom of man than the fallen nature of man, here's where things go sideways. A perversion of the idea of liberty or freedom is the fruit of the Enlightenment thinkers and has resulted in devastating consequences for the nation as well as the world. The politics of the nation have steered onto an off-ramp where freedom is now redefined to mean freedom to do instead of freedom for. Freedom to do whatever I want and the push to create laws to support that, as opposed to freedom for willfully following what I was created for, willfully following. St. John Paul's rightful railing against communism in the Soviet bloc was grounded in this, that communists prevented the exercise of freedom to choose God and religion. But in the West, another understanding of freedom, the Enlightenment notion, was well on its way to being established. This new understanding was either supported or not understood on the part of way too many Catholic bishops, generations of them at this point. And now there is a huge mess to clean up. This is the reality behind election 2024. JD Vance echoes this, which is why he's pummeled by the communist left, because they understand it as well. God love you. I'm Gary Michael Vorse.